Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Tanya Short. I am the Health and Human Sciences educator with Purdue Extension in Knox County, Indiana, and we're so happy that you are joining us today. We have an awesome program scheduled for you. I'm going to start out the day talking about food waste, its implications, where does it come from, and what we can do about it, and then our colleague Amanda Mosman is going to follow up with when there's things that just end up as waste no matter how hard we try, what can we do to maybe get some of that into compost, which is the next best thing. So let's go ahead and get started. And throughout the day today, if you have any questions, feel free to drop those in the chat box, and we'll try to answer those as we go along. So first of all, I would like to know what is it that you wanted to learn about today? What were you hoping to gain from our presentation today? Right, yes, absolutely. And so this is an issue that we hear about in Extension coming from a lot of our different community members, and it should be a topic of concern, as I will share with you later about why. So what is food waste? It is defined as any edible food that goes uneaten. So what does that mean, or what does that look like? So we have approximately 38 million tons of food waste annually. That is a lot of food waste. About 95% of that goes into landfills or incinerators. So we are wasting almost a third of our available food supply, and it contributes to 21% of our solid waste. And I would point out in this pie chart here that food waste is the largest single contributor to our solid waste, to our landfills, even surpassing plastics. So that's something that we, are very concerned about with our recycling and whatnot, but food waste is even a larger percentage of our waste compared to anything else, any other single item. And landfills account for approximately 18% of the methane emission production overall that goes into the atmosphere. So it is a huge environmental impact. So what does that look like for the family? So estimates are somewhere in the 420, 450 pounds of food wasted per year per person. So if you're thinking about a family of 4, that's about $1,600 every year in rotten food that's thrown in the trash or poured down the drain. Furthermore, if you calculate the amount of emissions that are produced by that much food, it's equivalent to the same amount of emissions produced by the electricity that is used to fuel your house for an entire 1/3 of the year. So quite, again, I will emphasize, not only a huge financial impact for families, but a fairly large environmental impact. So this chart on the right here, this is where does our food waste come from? What is it that we're wasting? This chart on the right here is the categorized by food group. And so what is going into the trash? You can see approximately half of our food waste, a little more than half, is our fruits, our vegetables, and our dairy. So those highly perishable products. Followed by grains over here, probably is the next largest one, and then meat, poultry, and fish. So what does that calculate to in money? So again, we can see our fruit, our vegetables, and our dairy account for approximately a little less than half of the amount of money that's wasted. But look at how much money we lose when we have that package of meat that gets thrown away. Not confession, you don't have to tell me, but I want you to confess to yourself. If you have ever purchased a package of meat and it's been in your refrigerator, you had plans to cook it on Wednesday, something happened, you said, I need to freeze that, you didn't do it, and the next thing you know, you went to use it over the weekend and it was beyond use, and you just threw out $10, $12, $18, $25 worth of meat because you didn't get around to using it. So quite painful financially, not only environmentally. But what does this look like visually with all that food piled up on a table? So this infographic came from a piece that the New York Times did a few years ago based on data from the USDA and from the Census Bureau. So in a family of 4, this is approximately how much food, a visual representation of how much food is wasted. And again, you can see it's a lot of our highly perishable products. So our fruits and vegetables, our milk, dairy, breads, grains, and so on and so forth. So the question we have to ask ourselves is how much of that is preventable? Just like the story I asked you about the meat that went bad in the fridge. So if we think about all of the food and drink that is wasted in a household, approximately 2/3 of it is preventable. And that's for a couple of reasons. One, either we prepared too much, or 2, we didn't get it used in time. And so this prepared or served too much could be that you scooped too much on your plate and then it just got, put on into the trash when your meal was over. Or the not used in time, maybe we had leftovers and we didn't store them properly. Or like the meat or the produce, they got shoved in the back of the fridge and forgotten about until they were wilted and no longer usable. So how can families reduce food waste? What can they do? Well, I found this recent survey that talked about what folks thought they wanted to know or needed to know in order to be able to reduce their food waste. So how do you store specific foods? What are some recipes I can use to help use up that leftover food? What do those date labels mean? How closely should I abide by them? And so on and so forth. So let's dig into a few of these. Number 1, product dates. There are lots of different versions. I am happy to say there are fewer versions than there used to be. However, they all, no matter what language you see, they almost always indicate the same thing. And that is that these are suggestive of quality and not safety. So very rarely, let me take that back. Often it's an indicator of, hey, this is a day you should shoot for. It's not a you must throw this in the trash on this date because it is no longer good. So something you may have not known is that these dates are actually not even required by federal law. That is completely voluntary by manufacturers. And the exception there is for infant formula and baby food. This is absolutely required by law. And I have to emphasize there, do not use infant formula or baby food after the use by date. There could have been, and this is for 2 reasons. 1, there could have been nutritional degradation, and we know that babies and infants do not eat a ton, so every bite they eat needs to be packed with nutrition. And number 2 is that, for example, in case of infant formula, as it ages, it may not mix properly, so then it's not going to flow out of the nipple the way that it should, and so then therefore the baby's going to have trouble eating. So infant formula and baby food do not use past the due date. Otherwise, those dates are a guide of quality as opposed to food safety. Now, my last bullet point there is to remind you that that countdown clock onto the longevity of your food, that changes once you've broken the seal, right? We have those dates are really for if it's unopened, this is how long it should stay in a top quality. So in order to answer some of our other food storage questions, I do have a publication that Purdue produced a few years ago that is quite lengthy, but it's very comprehensive, and I like it because of that. So it helps you understand, has a great little chart in the following pages on what is the suggested storage times and how long things should last either in the fridge or in the freezer. So as a general rule, well, first of all, let me remind you that your fridge needs to stay at 40 degrees or below, so like 32 to 40. or sorry, 34 to 40. You don't want it to freeze, and your freezer should be at 0 degrees. The general advice is that things in the fridge stay for about 3 to 5 days, whereas in the freezer, it's about 12 months if you've got it at that 0 degrees. Now, technically, as long as the food has been kept frozen, it will stay safe to eat indefinitely, right? There's no spoilage. The spoilage microorganisms have been halted during the freezing process. However, much past a year, you're going to start experiencing significant deterioration in the quality of the food product, getting freezer burn, dehydration, etc. And so it's really, really important to label things when we're putting them in the freezer, and that can be one simple action that you can take to minimize food waste and keeping those items rotated in your freezer based on the date they need to be used by. And so thinking about a little bit more about storage. So this graphic is from the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, and talking about, first of all, in our freezer, making sure that it's properly wrapped in freezer paper or in a freezer Ziploc bag. So we're not just throwing our package of meat in the freezer without doing something else to it. That plastic on our meat is meant to be semi-permeable to the air to help it breathe a little bit, and so that's not really conducive to the freezer environment. It's going to get dehydrated really quickly. And then we want to think about our dairy and our eggs. Are they in the back of our fridge, not in the door, which is constantly being opened, right? The stuff that's in our door should be our condiments or other things that are not as temperature sensitive as our more perishable foods. Thinking about putting meat on that lowest shelf in case there's any sort of leakage, and that's a food safety thing, so it doesn't contaminate your other foods. And then the crisper drawers are ideally intended for our fruits and veggies, right? Now, how many of you, I have a question, I'm going to lean on Valerie to pull up the chat box here because I'm struggling to see it a little bit. How many of you know what it means, or how many of you have the crisper drawers that say like high humidity, low humidity, and do you know what that means? Some yes, some no. Well, I'll give you a little hint here. So high humidity means that you're closing off that little vent. So there's going to be less air circulation in that specific drawer. And this is going to be better for leafy greens and most of our vegetables. So think about our carrots, our celery, our cauliflower, our broccoli. And then if we want a low humidity drawer, we want to leave that little air vent open. So it's going to get more circulation in that drawer. And this is going to be things like our fruits, our mushrooms, peppers, avocados, etc. Now, my only argument about crisper drawers, and the thing I don't like as a nutritionist, is folks say to me, Tanya, we always let our fruits and vegetables go to waste because they're down in those drawers and we don't see them and we forget about them. If putting your produce in those drawers causes that same problem in your house, then possibly that's not where they belong. They belong on a higher shelf where you're going to see them and eat them. Because if they're in those drawers in their optimal humidity little compartments, staying as well preserved as they can, it's not going to make any bit of difference, right, if you don't see them and eat them. So it's kind of counterproductive. Moving over to the pantry, we want to think about canned goods. Are they stored in an appropriate place? They shouldn't be exposed to extreme temperatures, either high or low. Remember that our canned goods can generally stay, or our jarred goods can generally stay on the shelf until they are open. And make sure you're looking at your packaging to see if it says refrigerate after opening. Our potatoes and our onions like a cool, dark, dry place. However, do not store them in the same bin together because they will actually cause, the onions will cause the potatoes to ripen more quickly. So, and then we want to think about fruits with pits, peaches, plums. We want to leave them at room temperature until they're ripened, and then we can put them in the refrigerator. And so kind of a summary there. You can see, obviously, we want bananas, mangoes, etc. And my caveat being on these, like once they're cut, we need to get things in the fridge because we've exposed them now to the air, to potential contamination, and also just to quicker deterioration, right? Once we cut that fruit, it's going to go bad more quickly. So we want to get it refrigerated. Potatoes and onions never go in the fridge before they're cooked. And then our winter squashes can also stay outside the fridge until they've been cut. This picture here is talking about storing fresh herbs. So if you buy an herb cutting from the store, one way to store that and so that it stays fresher longer is to fill a cup, maybe an inch so of water, put your herbs down in that water, the tips down. Well, you want to snip them at an angle like you would for a flower cutting. Put them down in that water and cover it loosely with a bag. I've seen some folks even put a rubber band on that. That's really not necessary, and it can almost be counterproductive because now you're giving it absolutely zero air circulation. It's already getting pretty minimal. The only reason you might want to do that, I'll tell you a quick story from my weekend. I actually just took this picture. This cup of cilantro is still in my refrigerator, and even though I had it scooted all the way back on a shelf where I thought my toddler wouldn't notice, he said, "Oh, what's that?" And he grabs it by the top and pulls it out, and as you can imagine, all the water, all the cilantro went everywhere. So I got to rewash it all and repackage it and put it back in my fridge. And I hope you're all laughing because it was funny after it was over. But anyway.
I can commiserate. I forgot to open the bag of apples because our toddler will open our Christmas drawer to get crisper drawer Christmas. That's what he acts like an apple is. And he pulled the whole package out, and it just happened. The twist busted. I had apples everywhere. We had to wash all of them and put it back.
Yeah. Yes. So, I would like to, before we talk about anything on this slide, I would like to reemphasize that this comes directly from the United States Department of Agriculture, Food Safety, and Inspection Service. So if something has mold, can you use it? This is not a comprehensive list, but if you were to search that department name and put like using mold on food, I'm sure it would take you directly to this website where I took this information. So several of these you will see you can actually continue to use. So the hard salami, so things that are meant to be shelf stable, you can actually scrub that mold off and it will still be safe. Things like hard cheese or firm fruits and veggies. So things like cabbage, bell peppers, carrots, and stuff like that, you can cut off an inch beyond the mold and keep it. Now, for me, that's not really happening in my house. But if you're thinking about your soft fruits and veggies, so cucumbers, peaches, tomatoes, or your soft cheeses, that's not going to be a safe practice because the mold fingers have been allowed to travel, and it is very well that the mold is much farther into the food product than you can see. But as far as some of these tougher, the salamis, firm fruits, and hard cheeses, you can actually cut off the molded part and use the remainder. However, if you are not comfortable doing that, or you have a doubt in your mind, I always go back to my food safety training, and that should prevail. When in doubt, throw it out, okay? However, you say to me, okay, Tanya, what else can I do? Well, one simple yet a little tricky to implement is making a plan. Tricky is maybe not the right word. It takes time and commitment to do meal planning. So number one, shop your kitchen. Know what's in your freezer, what's in your fridge, and what's in your pantry. And so this might mean taking an inventory every couple weeks or once a month, keeping it. I know for me, in my house, I have a whiteboard where I keep at the very least an inventory of what is in my deep freeze, because I'm not in it as frequently as I am my fridge and the attached freezer. So knowing what you have on hand, especially when it comes to your perishable stuff, but even when it comes to your freezer stuff, you want to use that stuff and keep it rotated. Just as a side note, another story. I had a community partner confess to me recently. She said, you know what? I cleaned out my freezer recently and we had meat in there from 2012. And she said, I don't even know how it got in there because we moved in 2013. So we had to have moved that meat with us. And then it's been in the freezer ever since then. So, and she threw it all out. I mean, it's 8 years old. It was probably still safe to eat. It probably would have been incredibly dehydrated. So who knows how much money she threw out because she wasn't keeping track of what was in her freezer. So once you know what you have, you can plan your meals. And we have a whole nother program that can go into that and helping you think through some tools that could help you with that. And then use a grocery list. What do I need? What do I already have? And what else do I need to buy? And so this is just one example, this little image here of what that might look like. You know, you could list everything you have or everything you need, but then note the things that you already have, or for example, or so on. So however it helps you keep it straight in your mind. And using a grocery list does two things. One, we don't impulse buy. And two, we don't have to make another trip back to the store later, right? Which is not something I enjoy doing any day of the week, personally. So what else can we do? Thinking about prepping. So what can you do? How can you make time after your shopping trip or within a day of getting that stuff prepped and ready to go? And so here are a few things that I do personally at home. And I found this picture. This is from last fall. We did a shelf on the ELF campaign with Purdue Extension Health and Human Sciences. And so he was helping me cut some butternut squash. Somehow I had come across an abundance of them and there was no way we were going to eat those in time. So I went ahead and got them chopped up and prepped and in the freezer. You know, when I come home, my vegetables get chopped right away and put in the fridge because if I don't, they don't get eaten, they don't get used. Celery and onions, I cook with a lot. So I chop them, I get them in a freezer bag, and I freeze them. So when I'm ready to cook, I can just measure out or shake however much out that I need, and I'm ready to go. It's a no prep supper. Now this right here, I wasn't sure whether I was showing you how to freeze your leftovers for taking them to work at lunch or if I was showing you how to not organize your freezer. And despite the little bit of embarrassment, I decided to go ahead and share this freezer. So I've let mine get a little disorganized lately. But you know, anytime I have leftovers that I know aren't going to get eaten, I immediately prep them in single serve containers. And so that's stuff that I can use on nights that I don't have time to cook. We can pull it out and warm it in the microwave, or I can take it to lunch with me. Another big thing I do is I pre-patty my hamburger and my sausage into patties, and then I can freeze it. Or I will even pre-brown my hamburger and freeze it so that, again, I'm wanting to make that casserole or I'm wanting to make tacos. All I got to do is pull it out of the freezer, add my seasoning, and I have supper in much less time. And plus, I'm just dealing with all that grease and all that cleanup all at once, and instead of every time I want to cook. And then lastly, I don't know how well you can tell, but this is a chuck roast that I actually cut up to use in a stir fry or in a stew. And so, and again, then I froze it. And so it's ready to go, kind of doing that pre-prep. And that helps me not only to be able to cook, being a working mom, to go home and cook and get supper on the table, but to know that that food is prepped and packaged in the freezer so it's not going to store or spoil, sorry. And so the last thing is to actually eat what you buy, right? If you know you really want your kid to eat, I don't know, blueberries, and he doesn't like blueberries, and no one else in the house really likes blueberries except you, you're probably only going to be buying a small container, right? Not a big one. So thinking about that and what actually gets used in your household, and then maybe you even have a designated corner in your fridge, and like, these are the things that are going to expire. Please use this gallon of milk before you open the new one in the back if you have, you know, kids in your house or other adults in your house that tend to not pay attention so well. And so how can you designate that food? So lastly, I have a couple of handouts that I would like to share with you. One is things we can do with our refrigerated leftovers. So what can you know, cooking stale bread, how do we use that fruit that's going a little bit soft? And then this one over here is how to throw together what I call a pitch-in casserole. So you're pitching in a handful of everything that you've got left over to make a new meal. So plandovers, as you would maybe think of it. And so these are documents that I would love to share with you if they would be helpful. So lastly, here's a few more things that I do at home. My son is notorious. I don't know if you can tell right here. It's really funny because he's 3 and the peel is his favorite part. And he doesn't want me to cut the apple. So he will eat it, and he'll eat like the whole peel around it to where I have an unpeeled apple, but now it's like been eaten on all edges and it's starting to brown. So I slice it, I throw on some brown or cinnamon and little tidbit of sugar. I simmer it up, and voila, I've got cinnamon apples. Smoothies. So anytime, or bananas, sorry. He's also really notorious for maybe eating half a banana and then saying he's done. So I have a baggie that I keep in the freezer where I throw all those half bananas, or I smash it and add it to our pancake batter or to my oatmeal, or, obviously banana bread is always a good go-to. And I have not tried this because I don't have a food processor like this, but you can make banana nice cream, they call it. So you basically just slice and freeze bananas and then throw them into your food processor with this type of blade and whip it up into like this frozen banana dessert. It doesn't work as well in the blender just because for a blender, you have to have some amount of liquid generally to get them to blend well. So, but you'd have a nice banana smoothie, I guess. Another thing, what do we do with those stalks, broccoli, cauliflower, etc.? So you can mince them up. So this right here, I minced up some broccoli stalks and some cauliflower stalks, added my dressing, some craisins, some sunflower seeds, and I had broccoli cauliflower salad. So you can also freeze them, add them to soup later, do lots of different things with them. So really thinking outside the box what we can do with these things that have typically been considered waste. So our stale bread, it's super easy to make homemade breadcrumbs. Just add your favorite seasoning, toss it in the oven for a designated amount of time, cut and be ready to go to add to your other foods or to slice it as croutons to add to your salad. Thinking about roasting those pumpkin seeds, incredibly high in nutrients, so a very healthy snack. Not terribly hard to make. Throw it in the oven with, again, your favorite seasoning for about 30 minutes, and you have a nice golden snack ready to go. And so, is there anyone out there who would like to share if you have a favorite leftover reboot or way that you repurpose food scraps to try to minimize the waste in your household?
Around Thanksgiving, I always love using the turkey like in a turkey gravy and just different turkey recipes that are fabulous. So that's one of my favorites.
Absolutely.
Keith and I like to do, when we're meal planning for the week, we like to do either beans or rice. And we can keep that cool in the fridge and then make a variety of things. That can go to tacos. It could go cook some meat and veggies real quick and have a stir fry. But those are 2 use-all type products that, we can have and have most of it prepped because we'll use the Instapot on Sunday and then keep them through the week to be able to make shorter things. One of the coolest things, I don't cook, I clean. My husband's the cook, I clean. This is the way that it works in our household, okay? And he's one of those people that uses a new spoon or a new pot, so my job's cut out for me. But he has one of the new water percolators for cooking meat. I am sold. That just makes the tenderness meat. We can pop it right in from the freezer bag. So, and we've put some things in that I'm like, oh, that may look like it had a little freezer burn. But it's in the bag, it's in the water bath, it sits there for an hour. You can cook the meat at the exact temperature to make sure that it's cooked and not dried out. And I'm not seeing any of the flavor issues with meat that's been in the freezer for a long time, or less, maybe not none, but I'm less. of the flavor issues with those percolators. I don't know what it is. The water
And
percolator.
what's that called again?
It's a water percolator type thing. So it heats the water to a certain degree. It's a water bath. And so, say we have a couple of steaks, and they're in our freezer bag, they're in the freezer. I can pop them in a pot full of water. I add that percolator on the side, tell it to cook at 140, 145 degrees, and an hour later, it's gold. It's like I can cook my meat and not have to stand there and worry about it, which with toddlers is great.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's not necessarily a leftover reboot, but it has caused us to be able to use things in a different manner so we don't waste.
Yeah, right.
But I'm so doing the freezer whiteboard. That's happening. Thank you for that idea.
Oh, yeah. There you go. And so another thing, I actually, speaking of like using your leftover turkey, some pictures I did have on here that I took out was like using your leftover scraps from, say, when you trim up your celery or your carrot peels and your onion skins. So throwing that in your Instant Pot with your chicken bones and making your homemade chicken broth, but you still have the waste at the end, right? You've just kind of used them a little bit more, if you will, unless you don't strain the veggies out, I guess. So in conclusion, I guess I would say, what are the things we need to do? Store our food timely and properly. Make sure we have an inventory of our kitchen. Meal plan and make sure we're only buying what we need, or that we know we have a plan to get that into the freezer or into storage in an appropriate amount of time. If, for example, you buy excess of something because it's on sale. Thinking about how you can plan to pre-prep and make sure those things are ready so that you can use them, and use what you buy, right? How many times, and you can answer to yourself, have you had a meal in your mind, you knew what you were going to cook for dinner, but you had a really long day at work and you just could not possibly fathom going home and cooking, and you ended up stopping by fast food or ordering pizza or doing something else? Totally get it. But that meal you had planned for that night, that food, something needs to be done with it, right? So it doesn't end up going to waste. And ultimately be creative. You guys shared a couple of different things that you all do in your own household, and it might involve just like getting input from others. Like, hey, what are some ideas that you can give me how you make this work in your house? And so the last question I had, and I think I got one answer to this already, is there one action you feel confident you could take to help reduce food waste? And, using that whiteboard to know what you have is one way to do that as well. Was there anything else you would add to that?
I know I need to get better at like what you mentioned about kind of prepping the fruit and veggies, because it's one of those, like, if I rinse the veggies or the fruit, like, we'll eat it, but if it's not pre-rinsed or whatever, then we tend to kind of like, oh man, we have to rinse it. That just, and it seems like just like an overly, through the work week, it's just like, man, that's just way too much work some days. So, which sounds silly, but it's some weeks.
No, I can totally relate. Yeah. If it's not grab and go, it's not going, right?
Yeah. So definitely going to try and work on that a little bit more.
So lastly, thank you. And my final comment, I think, would be just to say that in those cases, and I had a picture of coffee grounds I was going to throw up here because I am not reusing those in any way. So sometimes we have that waste, right, that is just going to be waste. And what can we do with that? And composting is one of those things we can do. And I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Miss Amanda then, and she can talk to us a little bit about that.